All right, so now that you know a little bit about the Soviet-Afghan War, let's see if we can't sequence out, how this all kind of plays out. The first thing that you should understand here, that you should know, and is represented by this political cartoon, is the physical geography of Afghanistan has led to it being independent for a long time. It's led to it being defended very well by its natural physical geography for a long time. Afghanistan has long been known as the graveyard of empires. Now, what exactly do they mean by the graveyard of empires? Well, as you can see by all these tombstones around the central mountain, which is going to represent Afghanistan, you've got the Roman Empire. The Romans tried to, conquer this area. Afghanistan was always a place that was able to kind of insulate itself. The Mongols tried to, failed. The Egyptians tried to, failed. The British, they colonized here for a very, for a short, for a while, and ultimately are going to get out very, very early. The Turks, the Macedonians, the all these different empires have tried to take over Afghanistan and have failed. And ultimately, you've got what are American soldiers trying to push this boulder up the hill and conquer Afghanistan. The question is American money, the promise or a project of a new American century for Afghanistan, going to ultimately amount to anything? Why? You've got your natural defenses with the mountains, but there are other things that really have kind of insulated a little bit. Tribal rule, the idea that you can't just for a long, long time you couldn't just go into Afghanistan and say, "Hey, I'm going to take over this government, and that's going to lead to me running Afghanistan." It didn't work that way. You had tribal rule. So you had a lot of different groups that had control of their separate areas. Competition without throughout those groups makes it so that they don't necessarily want to all agree to be taken over by, say, the Romans. You've got civilizations that for their entire existence have been based on, we're going to use our natural defenses to keep people out and not have a lot of contact with the outside world. So there's a lot of different reasons or a lot of different ways to explain why Afghanistan has been able to hold out as long as they have. So the question we got to ask then is, how does Afghanistan ultimately become a proxy war? If you look at it, Afghanistan, small country. You've got the mountains, like we said. It's half a world away. Why get involved in any kind of war located here? Ultimately our goal here is going to be to sequence out the answer to really this question. And something I want to make sure that everybody understands is that we're taking something very, very complex, as evidenced by this concept map that shows you all the different interconnections with all the groups and all the different approaches in regards to Afghanistan. We're taking something that is extremely complicated and trying to simplify it for the sake of us getting the idea or the concept behind this whole Soviet-Afghan War. Okay, so it all starts out with the Soviets and communism. We all know that the Soviet Union was a communist nation. They were the primary communist nation in the world following World War II. Communism had started to spread into other parts of the world, including Afghanistan. And just like with the Truman Doctrine, we said that, hey, we're going to support democracy wherever it is in the world. The communists are basically saying the same exact thing. They're not doing anything that we're not doing here in the United States. It's just that it's on the other side of the equation. So in Afghanistan, communism, being right next to the Soviet Union, was taking shape. There were people that wanted to become communist in Afghanistan. So the Communist Party ultimately is going to take power within that country. When they do, there are certainly going to be groups because of their makeup. There's going to be groups within Afghanistan that are going to fight against that. One of those is known as the Mujahideen. Okay, the Mujahideen really were just going to be, a tribe, a group within Afghanistan that didn't want to be communist. Um, the United States is going to look at the Mujahideen and they're going to see freedom fighters. They're going to see ordinary citizens that are rising up against the evil communists and are ultimately trying to make their country free. The Soviets are going to see them as terrorists. They are trying to, commit acts of terrorism against the communists within the country. So Soviets feel like we have to do something about it. They see what the Mujahideen is doing and fighting against the government as a rebellion. And because there's a rebellion going on, that ultimately, in their eyes, gives them the right to invade Afghanistan. So they are going to, in the 1970s, invade Afghanistan under the premise that they're there to help the communists who are trying to run Afghanistan. Um, Now, as this war goes on, they're going to bring in all of their big time equipment, tanks and helicopters and things like that. And the Mujahideen, by all the while have simple weapons, simple things. So ultimately, if the Mujahideen is going to have any success with this, they're going to have to get some help and some support. They're going to find that in the United States and, oddly enough, in Pakistan. So why? Why would the United States get involved? Why would Pakistan get involved? Well, first of all, Pakistan looks at the situation and says, huh, okay, well, Afghanistan's right here, Pakistan is right here. If the Soviets can invade Afghanistan, what's to stop them from invading Pakistan next? So their first reasoning behind why they would get involved is self-preservation. They don't want to see Afghanistan fall because then they would be the next logical choice. Okay, so the United States were going to get involved primarily because, well, hey, you know what? Our whole concept of the Cold War was around containment. We have to contain communism. We cannot let it spread to other places. So if we don't get involved here in some way, if we don't help the Mujahideen, then we are allowing communism to exist. We can't do that. So we are going to see it as this is an opportunity for us to, further that idea of containment. We want to make sure that communism doesn't spread. There's instability in the area. Instability means communism has the ability to spread. We can't do that. We're going to support the Mujahideen. However, it's complicated because if we physically get involved, if we are seen as being involved in this, we had already been involved in Korea, we had already been involved in Vietnam, this was not going to be something that was going to sit well. So we wanted to get involved, but not be as frontline visible as we had been previously. So how do we do that? Well, we get involved by supporting this group. Well, if we give them American weapons, then it's going to be real obvious that we're getting involved. So how can we support this group without doing that? Aha, that's where Pakistan comes in again. Because what we can do is we can provide Pakistan with money to purchase Soviet weaponry. Yes, we had the Pakistanis purchasing Soviet weaponry and providing them to, you guessed it, the Mujahideen. So, what ultimately happens is the Mujahideen is going to use Soviet weapons against the Soviets. So that there's no real trace, no obvious trace of the Americans' involvement. Um, Now, ultimately, us going in and helping, aiding Pakistan is going to create issues with India. Um, us picking and saying that we're supporting the Mujahideen can become problematic. Ultimately, why? Well, because if we pick one group there, what's going to happen afterwards? We'll talk about that in just a second. Us picking a side in what could happen afterwards creates potential problems for us to come in and be a peacemaker. Um, so, all in all, the Soviet Afghan War is going to last somewhere in the range of about 10 years. Once the Mujahideen starts getting these Soviet weapons, anti tank grenades, bazookas, anti aircraft missiles, things like that, now they really are able to start fighting back against the weaponry, the machinery that the Soviets had. When that happens, the Soviets realize this is a no-win situation. It winds up becoming their version of the Vietnam conflict for us. So ultimately, after about 10 years, they're going to withdraw from Afghanistan and the war is going to be over. But like I said, that is ultimately it seems like it would be a good thing, but there are going to be some issues that are going to come with that. So we always have to ask the question, what comes next? What comes next after the Soviets withdraw? What happens next? The real quick version of that is that this group, the Mujahideen, they are going to want to take power for themselves. So they're going to ultimately start a civil war. Um, when they start a civil war, that means other groups within Afghanistan are going to want to get involved and take power for themselves. Ultimately, the winner of that civil war is going to be a group known as the Taliban. The Taliban, who have very fundamentalist Islamic beliefs, are going to take power within the country. And ultimately, they're going to support other groups that are going to have similar beliefs, like Al Qaeda. And Al Qaeda is ultimately going to be the group that is going to carry out the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So saying that, hey, we're going to support this group and then kind of back off from that, it ultimately is going to create long term issues within Afghanistan.